So, I apologize first of all. So two things. One, as I mentioned, we're like coming out of sickness, and long story short, but my husband and business partner Scott is going to pick up our son from daycare. Apparently, he's not feeling so great. So I guess we're not out of the woods quite yet. So he's not going to be able to join us, but the two of us are. I'll talk a little bit about our company, but it's just the two of us that are at our company. So he's, I like to say, the better half. But you guys will miss him today, unfortunately. And the second thing, I apologize. We just moved. We actually work out of our house as part of keeping our overhead low as a small scale developer. And so we're still in the midst of kind of putting things on the walls and that sort of thing. So excuse the background. I'm so excited to talk with you guys. I think there's a lot of opportunity for mass timber in the Midwest. And so to have kind of an Ohio team excited about it, really happy to share. That's our kind of our MO. We open source all of our information. If you have any questions, we are happy to share data sheets, contacts, anything. So let us help you help bring more mass timber to the masses. I just sent you a request to share, if you don't mind. I think I need permission for that. And then let's see if I can get my computer to, um, all right, here we go. All right, can you guys see this screen
Yep.
here with the presentation on workforce housing?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Um, Okay, so my guess is, given the title of your all's group, the Carbon Leadership Forum, that I might be a little bit preaching to the choir on some of these things. So please don't hesitate. I want to make this as useful for you all as possible. So if you already know some of this stuff, just raise your hand, say we got it, keep moving, get us into more detail or whatever the case may be. Okay. But this is a really a topic near and dear to our hearts. As I mentioned, we share all of our information, and part of that is giving these types of presentations. We do them virtually, we do them in person all across the country. And so if this sparks something, we also have multiple different presentations. If any of this sparks something that you want us to talk with a different team about, we're always happy to do so. I'll kind of tell you as we go through, like what slides we have an even deeper dive presentation into and that sort of thing, so we can kind of tailor things to what you are interested in about mass timber. But we'll just kick it off. So our kind of specialty is affordable slash workforce mixed use housing. This is an example of a mass timber building we're under construction on right now. We're about 40% complete. I should have grabbed a picture. Might have a picture from a couple weeks ago, but basically we're topped out on this building right now. We're working to install the kind of the zip around the exterior, and then we'll get kind of the roof done, and we'll get windows in and kind of get fully dried in here over the course of the next month or so. So we're really excited about this one. It's, as you mentioned, our third mass timber building under construction. We have a fourth in the works. And of course, as you know, with development pipelines, you're always looking down the road. And so we've got a couple more that are very early. We don't have any funding secured or anything like that. But basically, I hope that shows you all that we're sold on this material. We have also done historic tax credit renovations, and so we continue to do that. But for any new construction now, we exclusively do mass timber. So just a quick slide about our company. We're Cutler Development. It's Molly and Scott Cutler. My husband's Scott, of course. This is just sort of a smattering of pictures. Some are renderings, some are actual pictures of projects that we've done in and around mostly central Iowa. We've consulted on a project in Alabama, consulted on one in Colorado, but really our primary focus for our own portfolio is here in the central Iowa area. Um, our we're a mission driven company, so our mission is to develop projects that better neighborhoods, society, and the environment. We're very driven by locating projects in dense, walkable, kind of urban feel neighborhoods. We think it also matches up with this storyline that we're working on, which is, um, ties into the third piece of our mission statement, which is the environment. I mentioned we do historic tax credits, so we try to like reuse and reduce where we can. And then where we can't, some buildings can't be saved, or it's just a plot of land, or whatever the case may be. When we do new construction, as I mentioned, we now do mass timber. And we'll talk a little bit about how we've started taking it kind of with each project, we push that environmental goal a little bit farther. The middle pillar of our company is society. We um, we tend to do mixed use projects. We have commercial on the first floor and apartments above. And I think 90, I looked the other day, we're at like 97% of our we're a small developer, but 95 to 97% of the units are at some affordability level. We've really found a sweet spot in the 30 to 80% area median income kind of range. And we typically do about 20% of the units at 30% area median income, and then 80% of the units at 80% area median income. We think that that's a really nice blend of tenants, and it allows us to apply for certain funding sources that help subsidize the project so that we can then go locate it in these kind of typically higher price point, like urban neighborhoods. We've found that tenants who are living upstairs are working in as the cashiers down the street or as the bartenders down the street. And they don't, when we do like maintenance walkthroughs, we notice a lot of people have electric bikes, and occasionally we'll follow up in passing with them and understand and learn that they don't actually have cars. A lot of these buildings are on zero lot line areas because of the location in dense walkable nodes. And so we don't necessarily know if a tenant has a car or not, because if they do, they park it kind of on the street or in city lots. And so that's been kind of an interesting side effect of this story, that the tenants are able to take their low carbon living space that's in the building and kind of extend that beyond the walls in the form of their transportation, how far they're commuting to get their groceries or to go to work, that sort of thing. It's kind of been a neat thing to learn about as a side result. Okay, so our evolution with mass timber. These are the three projects that we have either completed or are under construction. We completed what we call the Junction Lofts back in 2022. Again, we're a small scale developer, so this is 11 units above first floor retail. Again, that 30 to 80% AMI. And really, our goal with this project was just to make the mass timber pencil in an affordable housing kind of environment. How do we make the numbers even work? Fast forward 2 more years and we completed our star lofts. We took the learnings, of course, from Junction, made adjustments to get it even more to where it could kind of pencil even better. We still have this 30 to 80% AMI spread above a retail floor. We again use hybrid mass timber design. That's the way that we've found to make this pencil. So I'll go into what that means and how we do it. And then I mentioned in our mission statement, we've been pushing each project a little bit further on the environmental side of things. And so first one was just how do we get the mass timber to work, to pencil financially. Second one was, okay, let's see if we can actually quantify the carbon reduction of this building. And is there a certification out there that would fit and we could pursue? And so we're pursuing Living Future zero carbon certification. We're on track for that project. And then we're about 40% done with the Goldfinch Lofts. We'll be done. Hopefully, we're tracking for about November 1st of this year. And we've got, actually, we ended up, I need to update this. We ended up on 28 units, but again, 30 to 80% area median income. This is actually a LIHTC project. We condoed out the top floors of residential, and that's the LIHTC project. And then first floor of retail. We again have this hybrid mass timber design. We're again pursuing the zero carbon certification. We'll go into how mass timber plays into that, but really we found from the star lofts is the mass timber really contributed, of course, to the embodied carbon reduction of the building, less so to the operational. And it was really hard to make the numbers work to get the certification on operational carbon on star lofts. And so we did a big focus on goldfinch lofts to say, okay, how do we get the mass timber gets us there on the embodied? How do we get there on the operational? And one of the ways that we got there, or at least we have gotten there per design, now we're going under construction, is to pursue passive house certification on this one. I mentioned, so we started here. I kind of already did the overview here, but yeah, I think we can kind of flip through these. So why do we use mass timber? There are many reasons, but we have kind of narrowed it down to 5 that we like to talk about with folks, because usually it spurs more conversation and more questions. And so feel free, I'll take a pause after running through these 5 if anybody has specific questions on them. The first one, of course, gets back to our mission statement. One of the questions we always are asked is, how much more does it cost to do mass timber? We're 3 projects in now, and we can say that yes, it does cost a little bit more, but I'll get into sort of the benefits of it and how, like, where net we shake out. But as I mentioned, we're less bottom line driven, more mission focused, and that environmental piece is a huge part of our mission. And so the carbon sequestration that mass timber provides is really a primary driver for us to use it and to basically force us to figure out the financial side of it, and how to offset that increased cost. So I'll talk about how much more it costs and how we kind of offset that in a couple slides. But this is actual statistics from our Star Lofts building. You can see, so the way that the Living Future zero carbon certification works is you have a first round where it's basically your design of the building and how close you get. And then you have to go construct it, and you have to actually save the receipts for 1 calendar year of your energy usage and make sure that your building, including the either on or off-site renewable energy production, matches that. So you are truly net zero. And so this is the snapshot of the embodied carbon reduction on that project. We compare to a comparable building. You can see in the middle column there, the mass timber, we did low carbon concrete. We did a natural slate kind of shingle for the exterior cladding versus instead of like a wood like a fired brick. We took a couple other design decisions in terms of glazing on the windows, that sort of thing. All that summed up to a 28% reduction versus a comparable stick frame in terms of the carbon reduction. But then if you take it a step further and you say, well, the mass timber is also sequestering carbon. It's not just what was reduced in its production and its shipment to the site and its erection on the site, because we have to track all of those numbers. But when you consider how much carbon is actually getting stored in those mass timber beams, some are saying mass timber has a durability of 250 years. So for that time period, what does the reduction look like? And we've calculated it to about a 70% reduction. And so that zero carbon certification requires a 10% reduction in embodied carbon. The mass timber blows that away. And so you have to do 10% reduction, then you have to buy carbon offsets for the remainder to get your embodied carbon net zero. And so using mass timber, we have to buy a lot fewer. We basically have to buy 30% of the building off in those offsets versus 90%, something like that. Why mass timber? Reason number 2, we know that cutting down to achieve the same look and feel and even structural kind of capabilities with timber, if we weren't using mass timber, it would mean cutting down the large old growth trees in the forest, right? And that's like a very traditional form of timber housing. We know, though, that it's the small growth trees that are the tinder for wildfires. And it's the small growth trees that you can go through as part of healthy management of forest land. You're supposed to go through and cull those on a regular basis. Well, basically, mass timber goes and makes an end-use market out of those small growth trees by layering them on top of each other with some adhesive or depending on the type of mass timber, different ways of kind of getting those layers connected to achieve the same kind of structural rigidity. We um, we had the opportunity back when we did our first mass timber project. The Department of Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack at the time, um, it was really neat. He came to the site to announce funding for mass timber projects. And in his speech on the site, he basically said that the cost to for the U.S. On U.S. owned, like government owned forest land, the cost to cull those small growth trees is like $1,500 an acre. If a wildfire breaks out on that same acreage, it's like $50,000 an acre to go fight that fire. And so there's a huge incentive for foresters, the US and private land, to go and as part of, again, their healthy management of their forest to kind of cull these trees and then go and try and sell that small growth timber to mass timber manufacturers. Increased durability. I mentioned, so this is the Bullitt Center in Seattle. It's made of mass timber. You can't see it with the cladding. We need to get a picture that shows the inside, but it's made of mass timber. And on the top, that giant structure is all solar panels. And so they've designated this as the greenest building in the world, greenest commercial building in the world. And they are touting a 250-year useful life of the mass timber. And so in our line of work, we're not, we're doing things on a much smaller scale, and we're also focused on affordable housing. And so one of the things that we've found to really resonate with the funders of the affordability on our projects, federal government, state government, local cities are funding these projects to help subsidize the rents. What we've found is talking with them about the durability of mass timber really resonates. If we've got a building and we can build it one time in 250 years versus a stick frame that you'd have to build anywhere from 2 to 5 times over that same time period, their dollars are used once versus needing to reapply 2 to 5 times to recreate the same number of affordable units over that time period. Biophilic design, this is really a benefit for the tenant. There's plenty of studies out there now, especially over in Europe, because they're 20 to 30 years ahead of us on mass timber. But studies are showing, a mass timber school versus non-mass timber. Kids' concentration rates and grades are higher. Mass timber sections of hospitals versus non-mass timber. People coming in with the same ailment, the ones in the mass timber building are leaving sooner. There's a lot of factors. Same thing in offices. They're finding better concentration of employees, et cetera, lower heart rate, and that sort of thing. Of course, a lot of things go into that. And you can't say that it's all because of the mass timber, but there's certainly evidence that shows that the mass timber is at least neutral, if not to positive impact on the employees or on the tenants or on the users of those commercial, residential, and other spaces. And then lastly, increased lease rates. Again, we don't take advantage of this on the residential side because our rents are capped based on what the kind of affordability levels are. But one thing I will say on the residential side is we see faster lease up rates because people are excited to live in a mass timber building. So while we don't capture it on maybe the rent side, we do capture it in terms of kind of carrying costs and lease up assumptions in our models. But I mentioned that we do mixed use on the first floor of our buildings, where we also leave the mass timber beams, columns, decking exposed. We are seeing increased lease rates. JLL did a study that over in Europe, the mass timber commercial spaces get about 10 to 12% higher lease rates than non-mass timber. In our very small portfolio, we're seeing the same numbers. On the residential side, JLL also did a study. This is a picture of the Cent Tower in, I think it's Milwaukee. This building is mass timber. It was built within a couple years of the 777 building that's like 9 blocks away. That's not mass timber. And it's the same like luxury apartments. And JLL found an 8 to 10% increase in the residential rates of the Ascent Tower versus the non-mass timber building. So if you're kind of in the market rate to luxury rate space, you can definitely start to find data on how this mass timber kind of pushes these rates. I'll pause there for a minute. If anybody, I think we have kind of a crowd that's sizable enough that we could do some Q&A if you guys have any questions. I did mention, it costs a little bit more. So the next sort of section of this presentation is about what we do. We spend a lot of time value engineering. We have to do it on every single project, value engineering to get that cost down. And then I'll go into kind of the economic value that we see. Yes, there is an increased cost, but we see differences in OpEx and kind of leasability and that sort of thing. And we've just started to do some analysis on these 3 projects that we've got in terms of the actual like economic value we could potentially claim that mass timber brings versus as a detriment that a lot of people assume that it does. So I'm only forecasting what the rest of the presentation is in case you have questions about that. Maybe we can save those, but any questions on kind of what's been presented so far?
I've got two real quick. One,
Yeah.
I noticed all of them are hybrid mass timber. Is
Mhm.
that post and beam first floor and then light frame wood CLT above?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
So and that's a perfect segue into some of these strategies. I can show you like the next slide is an actual like exploded view of that first project I showed you. And then the pictures from the second project. So yeah, we'll go into like
Okay.
what is our
Awesome.
hybrid here on this slide. Any other
Awesome.
questions from folks on kind of the reasons? Is anybody getting I'm not sure what the mix, if it's like mostly architects on this call or mostly developers or like any architects getting pushback, trying to pitch mass timber and getting pushback from the developer saying, it doesn't pencil or like that kind of thing.
So that was my next question with the increased rates that JLL was seeing. Is that something a funding source is recognizing in the pro forma?
It depends. We so I don't know. I can't speak to the residential side because, of course, we just like basically the state or the federal government says, okay, you have to cap your rents at this number in exchange for this funding into the project, right? And so we just have to, that's our rule and that's what we follow. On the commercial side, what I will say is we have we have included that kind of aggressive increase, not maybe the full 10%, but we include like maybe about 5% in our going in asking lease rates when the bank is kind of sizing the loan. And we've got now, 2 projects to back those up. I think that's the key is they're going to want to see data.
Yeah.
And if that's a way that we can help you guys and give you our data as a Midwest kind of mid-sized city that would translate to a city in Ohio, we're happy to do that. But we have seen now with 2 projects that we can get those kind of aggressive lease rates, and so we're able to kind of convince the bank when they're lending because we always condo our projects, so we have a entirely separate like financial stack for the apartments and the commercial. We have 2 separate loans, cash flows, everything's separate. We make sure we do that so that all of our affordable housing funding sources know that their money's only going into those apartments and not going into any retail. And so we typically use the same bank for both loans, but we're getting 2 different loans from them. And so we have that conversation about the commercial and how the mass timber adds that value.
Thank you in advance for being willing to share that because I'm
Of course.
sure we will send people your way.
Good. Yeah. Cool. Well, if no other questions at this time, and just use the little like raise your hand button on the Zoom. We can pause at any time. Um, so the question was about hybrid design and what is our hybrid? So the way that people do it different ways. There's hybrid like steel mass timber. There's hybrid light frame mass timber. There's a couple. I have seen a few projects. I've actually seen one LIHTC project that was able to do mostly mass timber, which is just astonishing to me. I don't know how they got the numbers to work, but even like I don't know if you can see my mouse, but they even had like exterior walls made of mass timber on the upper floors, which is really impressive. Here's that project that I showed the rendering. This is the one we're under construction on, the very first slide. You can see the first floor. We got kind of our concrete slab here. We've got columns and beams, and then we don't show it here, but the decking is all CLT. And then essentially we line up we've worked on this design. Again, happy to share this if it's helpful. We've worked on a design of studios, one bedrooms, and two bedrooms that essentially allows us to transfer like load. And I'm not a structural engineer, so I know I'm talking to some KPFF folks here. So you guys could probably even explain this better than me, but essentially we can value engineer out the columns in the upper floors. Um, and by where we put our load bearing walls, our light frame load bearing walls of the units themselves. So you can see that in action right here. This is that second project we did, Star Lofts. You can see mass timber flooring so that it stays exposed on the underside. You can see up. That's the same mass timber here. This is CLT. And then we did glue lambs for in this project, it's a long story. We can get into why we had to do this, but we were not able to value engineer out the beams. So we think it's a cool aesthetic. It did cost more, but it's a cool aesthetic to have in the unit. So that's exposed as well. On this project, we actually figured out how basically using the spans of the units themselves and increasing to a 5-ply CLT that has a longer span. We actually ran the numbers, and 3-ply with more beams in the apartments was more expensive than 5-ply, just spanning the entire, basically the width and length of each apartment. And so it could rest on the light frame kind of stud walls. Does that answer your question?
It does. That
Okay,
is
cool.
what I had in mind, but wanted
Yeah.
to confirm.
It is worth though doing that analysis on projects of like 3-ply with more beams, 5-ply without, because we found it's sort of a coin flip which way it's going to go, just depending on the layout of your building. And so that would be something maybe to tuck away and ask your architect and structural to kind of run. One thing that we also KPFF has great knowledge across your national teams in mass timber, particularly in the Northwest. I know they've done a lot of projects in mass timber there. And so on this project here, we used the local KPFF group, and they reached out to the Oregon and Washington-based groups and got intel basically from them on how to design. On this project, we went with it was a great experience with KPFF. For other reasons, we went with Thornton Tomasetti, which is like they specialize only in mass timber. So you have kind of different options. We really think that part of our secret sauce, and we'll get into it, not secret sauce, but part of our sauce of how to make this work is we use local folks. We really believe that mass timber is approachable. You can use local structural engineers, you can use local architects, you can use local general contractors. You don't have to bring in specialized groups. And that for us helps us kind of keep costs down. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. We do stair and elevator core in mass timber. That's part of our zero carbon kind of push. So using that versus CMU. And then I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's basically it on this one. I think if you use steel and mass timber, you can really start to get some cost efficiencies. But we choose not to use that for the kind of the carbon footprint. Okay, next. So I mentioned a little bit of this, the 3-ply CLT versus 5-ply. Basically, you guys probably know this, the cost of mass timber is directly proportional to the volume of the fiber that you're buying, right? And so um, each company, mass timber manufacturer, and this is kind of interesting times we're in because everything is so new here in the US, that everybody has patented their own way of making mass timber. And so no two company, like you basically have to pick your mass timber horse pretty early in your project. and work with them to make sure that you can hold price. It's very relationship driven right now because everybody does have proprietary information. And so you can't just switch from one CLT manufacturer to another because they may not be able to make the same um, length panels or panels with the same structural rigidity or things like that. And so you have to end up kind of redesigning if you do switch midstream. So just something to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind on this is every you should find out from your mass timber supplier what is their panel length, their standard length, and then ideally you design your building to maximize every single panel, right? Because you're buying the whole panel regardless of whether you use 90% of it or 50% of it. And so that was something that we learned the hard way on our first project. Luckily, we found that we were chopping off like the last 5% of most of the panels, and that happened to be the a little bit more than what's required by code for the width of a step in the stairwell. And so we just reused all those pieces to create kind of the stairwell within a CMU tower on our first one. That's what gave us then the idea to go do the full CLT kind of stairwell for the next project. So just remember that same thing with like cutting out windows or cutting out, all of that is factored in. That's why it's very hard for us personally to make mass timber on like vertical walls work because there's just so much that gets cut out from windows and other things, doors, that sort of thing that you still have to pay for. Same thing with thickness. So 3-ply is the smallest you can do, or 4-inch mass ply panel if you're going MPP. We started out using exclusively just 3-ply CLT or 4-inch MPP because that was the only way we could get it to pencil. But then we started learning the trade-offs of like more beams if you go with a thinner panel, etc. And so starting to do that analysis has been crucial to us for figuring this out. Sound assembly. So people ask, well, aren't you just building a giant guitar? How do you, especially we've had a lot of people reach out to us who are trying to build luxury mass timber. They say, oh my gosh, like I can't just get by with code STC and IIC. I need code plus 10% or whatever. How do I get there? And so we had to do a lot of work. We actually created we worked with our mass timber supplier and our GC and our architect on our second project to invent this sound assembly, which is now part of Woodworks. They have hundreds of sound assemblies available that you should check out. We basically found that that using a 3-ply CLT was not enough mass in the mass spring mass kind of system buildup of a floor assembly to reach code sound. And so we added in this layer of gypcrete right here and we pulled that amount out of the lightweight concrete on top to get the 3-ply to be heavy enough, like mass enough to work in the mass spring mass. This was because we insist on our projects on using like a finished concrete for our flooring from just a wear and tear perspective and maintenance, OpEx, et cetera. That's really important to us. And so you could achieve your sound assembly requirements if you added a LVT on top or LVP on top. But we don't like to do that from a maintenance perspective. It's also when you consider the carbon between concrete or LVT, LVP, you'd actually be surprised, or maybe not. I don't know. It's new to me as a non construction engineer. But the carbon reduction is better. We can use a low carbon concrete for those floorings. I mentioned using local trades. That's in addition to using like local architects, engineers, et cetera. We save on local trades because we don't have, we're able, how do I say this? We don't prefab the panels to have all the cutouts for our MEP systems. And we do that on purpose because then we can bid it out to maybe smaller, more local, in a lot of cases, cheaper subs that we've used for a lot of projects in the past. And they do those drills right on site. It's a little bit more work, but the kind of the cost piece ends up being more financially advantageous to kind of do it that way. You can see our plumber was not not too happy after having to drill through 3-ply CLT. Plus, I think on some of these he did it after the sound assembly was included. So he's drilling through concrete, gypcrete, 3-ply CLT for this like spider web of plumbing. We did it this way though, so that we had a minimal number of columns that had piping coming down. So this is actually probably, I bet if you count, you'd know, but it's probably like 4 units worth of piping coming down here so that we minimize, and we only have that a couple times throughout the first floor so that we can kind of box this in, drywall it, soundproof it, and the customers getting a burger in the first floor have no idea. And then the fifth one is really there are resources out there that we have leveraged heavily and for free because they are set up to help expand the mass timber market. So the two that really come to mind are Woodworks and Think Wood, a couple others, Softwood Lumber Board, the APA, a couple others like that. I really want to shout out Woodworks here. Some example, basically, Woodworks is comprised of 100 structural engineers who are they receive funding in part from Softwood Lumber Board, also from the U.S. Forest Service, et cetera. And that's how they're a nonprofit. That's how they operate, and they are there to provide free advice and consulting to anyone trying to do mass timber projects. So ways that we've used them. On our first project, we didn't have any connections to anybody in the industry. So they connected us with several manufacturers, and we got going with them. We also used them on when our insurance for the first building came back. Our insurance agent was understandably unfamiliar with mass timber, jacked the price way higher than it would have been for a stick frame project. We were able to get Woodworks and our insurance agent on the phone together. Woodworks helped explain how, mass timber is better even than steel building because it's got a very predictable char rate, right? And you don't just go from 1 to 0, 1 to collapse at a certain temperature. You actually the first responders know exactly how much time they have, and when the fire's put out, you can scrub off all the char, add more timber, and you regain your fire rating. Things like that. That then our insurance agent brought the quote back down and basically in line with stick frame. A third example, when we went to we did our first couple projects in West Des Moines, and we did this project in Des Moines. We had Woodworks jump on a call with basically the planning department and walk through how and why mass timber was allowed via the Des Moines Code without any requested variations. So all that work, it's a lot of work and a lot of expertise, and it's all free. And so highly recommend that you reach out to your local Woodworks rep. They will come out to your site. We've had them come out to our site, suggest ways to kind of change things up with the contractor, that sort of thing. So just invaluable resources. Okay, this last section goes by pretty fast. We have like 20 minutes left. Maybe I'll just pause there. Any questions on, oh, I mentioned too that we give presentations on other areas of mass timber. We have a presentation on our value engineering alone. So now those 5, we actually have like 15 that we talk about, and we're happy to share again all of our designs, that sort of thing. So if that's of interest, let us know. We can send you that presentation if you want to just read it on your own, that sort of thing. But any questions on kind of that's like the top 5 most impactful ways to reduce your costs?
So I'm a little surprised that you post drill all those openings for MEP. What's that process like going back to the supplier, checking the design of the panel? Is there ever any reinforcing needed because of a big grouping of openings really close together?
I see what you mean. We definitely, we definitely have it on our plans when they go to size where it's going to be. But if we need to do some field, like basically a little bit of field mod, we just don't have it like fully fleshed out. But we have like, hey, in this like area is where the holes are going to be. So we haven't gone to, I can't even remember the term right now, but BIM, like
Yeah.
like our MEP guys don't have the software to like tell, okay, I need the hole here, here, here. But you're right. We have in the past, especially on beams, if we have to drill through beams, we say like, okay, this is the box, or we flip it around. We say, okay, KPFF, tell us, they told us, here's the box that you can drill in. And then our MEP guys, when they're in the field, they know, okay, I got to put it here, because I need to make it work within this box, basically.
That makes sense. And shout out Ashley, who's on the call. She's one of those woodworks folks you're talking about who's
Oh,
so helpful
awesome.
for these projects.
Oh my gosh, Ashley, you guys are amazing.
Thank you. Thanks for the shout out. And I don't think you and I have ever met, but I met your husband at an event
Oh,
last.
cool.
So I can say that I did not tell you to say that, but thank
Yeah, I
you.
was not paid for that, but I will say that till my last breath. You guys are just amazing. So thank you for everything you do.
Oh yeah, thanks for the presentation so far. It's great.
Yeah, of course. Um, Let me know if you guys have other questions on that. So just going into kind of this is for a developer, this is kind of the crux of it, right? Is how do we make this mass timber how do we prove that we're going to be able to financially get the project done and then have it operate the way that we're expecting to, right? That's what will make or break a deal. And so um, that was the focus of our first mass timber project, was just how do we make this work versus stick frame. And I pulled, these are like from a long, long time ago. These were high level estimates that our local GC did, showing it was about an 8% increase in cost. We've been able over time to work that a little bit harder and get it to about a 6%. But when people initially ask us how much more does it cost, this is more the number that we kind of gravitate towards, assuming like this was our first one. We were so green, we're still so green, but this was our first one, and we got it to an after some value engineering, we got it to an 8% project cost increase. But we always tell those people who say, well, that will kill my project right away. We always tell them, wait. That's only the first like part of this. That's the upfront cost. But let's talk about kind of what benefits mass timber brings. As I mentioned, so these buildings are two that we did in the same, these are actually literally across the street from each other. And you can see they look very similar. We took the design from the stick frame that we built 2 years prior on the left, and we used that on the right. That's what most people will do is they'll take a building that's already been designed for non-mass timber, and we did it. We didn't know any better. We took a building that was designed for mass timber. We brought it to an architect and we said, okay, shove mass timber in here and tell me how much more it costs. And I think that that's why we had that extra couple percent, or I know that's why we had that extra couple percent um, on the like initial project cost of mass timber. You will always, if you're not designing for mass timber from the get-go, always your pricing will be higher than if you designed for mass timber from the get-go. And so there's a little bit of a risk that the developer needs to take on the front end um, in saying, no, I want it to be mass timber, because you will make different decisions as an architect on how to design that building if you're starting with mass timber versus stick frame or steel concrete or whatever and trying to like reverse engineer mass timber. But this was what we had and this is what we worked with, and this is how we kind of figured it out. I mentioned already the 10% rent income. We see that on these two buildings. Again, it's affordable apartments in the upper stories, but on the commercial, it's like within 100 square feet of each other on commercial square footage between these two buildings. And the mass timber one brings in about 8 to 10% higher rents, literally across the street, built within 2 years of each other. The economic value we found, as I mentioned, this is a kind of a on the left is a picture of the interior of that building that has that was stick frame, and then this is a picture of the interior, actually not of the one that's across the street. This happens to be the second project we did, but it is what it looks like across the street. And you can see the polished concrete floors, and then all the exposed ductwork for MEP in the mass timber building. We do that on purpose to give it kind of like a loft-like feeling. And again, I mentioned, we save a lot on not having to go through and rip out flooring and redo flooring. If we have a water leak, the pipes are already exposed. If we need to fix lighting, AC, etc., we're not ripping into drywall, and that's all part of the aesthetic as well of the mass timber. So we estimate that at about a percent less in OpEx for mass timber for our portfolio, mass timber versus stick frame. So when you kind of, and again, this is very high level, but it's actually something we're really excited to start to dive into deeper as we're getting more units in mass timber and we have more data. But basically, if you took, this is not based on, these numbers aren't based on any project we did, but just for ease of math, if you took $1 million project, stick frame project, tack on 8% for your mass timber. On the income side, you tack on 10% for your rents. On the OpEx side, you subtract a percent for your expense ratio. We actually believe that there's a case for economic value brought by mass timber, that everybody shies away when they see that first 8% increase number, but they're not thinking about the long-term kind of economic viability of the project and what you get back from the beauty of mass timber, the durability of mass timber, what you get back in income and expense savings. So this is rough numbers, and ask me in about, it's actually one of our goals for 2026 to kind of compile more data and try to figure out using our real numbers, what this kind of cap rate increase could be for a project. I'll leave on one last slide here. We see mass timber as one of very few uniquely positioned materials to solve the dual crisis facing nearly every city across the country and across the globe today, right? On the left, you got UN numbers showing only 13% of the world's cities have affordable housing. On the right, you have, again, UN numbers showing that building materials and construction and building operation together account for close to 40% of global CO2 emissions by sector. That's like almost twice transportation. There's a ton of talk in the news about EVs and sustainable aviation fuel, and all of that is very important. But we have a lot of low-hanging fruit in the construction industry. And in particular, that mass timber is where this kind of pie chart is broken out, that building materials and construction, mass timber can do a lot. We've shown it does 70% reduction on that 11%, right? And so this is our why. Being affordable housing developers, why we look to mass timber, and we work really hard on our small scale to figure out how to make it work to kind of bridge the gap between these two crises in our small neck of the woods. That's our, I thought I had our emails in here. Feel free to reach out anytime. It's molly@cutlerdevelopment.com or scott@cutlerdevelopment.com. But thank you guys for having me. I'm sorry, I meant to leave about 15 minutes for Q&A, but we got 10, and I'm happy to stay on later if anybody has more questions.
I appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I know I work for Turner Construction Company, and I know at least in the region that I represent, we've done a few. So we're wrapping up a pharmacy education building at University of Michigan right now, and then we've got even a small mass timber carousel here in Columbus.
Oh, cool. A carousel, you said?
Yes.
Oh, I'll be really interested to hear, how are you guys weatherproofing that? We've long wanted to get more mass timber on the outside of these buildings to show what it is, but we can't figure out the weatherproofing side of things. So I'd be curious.
Me too. Once it's complete, I've seen the structure. I haven't seen the full design though.
Cool. Yeah. We have this one beam, or sorry, one column right here on this project, one column that's exposed to the elements, and we have a maintenance schedule on it, like every 3 years or something, we put a clear epoxy essentially on it so that it doesn't weather, but that's all we've been able to do so far.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad you guys that's really neat that the university is leaning into mass timber. I think that's something, like, mass timber is great for like mass scale projects, especially with a lot of repetition, like classrooms and that sort of thing. And so I'm really happy to hear that they're leaning into it. That's great. You guys have that contract. Congratulations.
Yeah, and my understanding is the the carbon footprint was a big
Cool.
decision factor for that. So absolutely.
Nice. Okay.
So I want to second that. This was awesome. Thank you for sharing this with us. Um, two more questions from me. You mentioned it is hyper specific to different suppliers. Do you guys stick with the same supplier project to project, or who supplies you in Iowa?
That's a great question. We actually have used three different suppliers for the three different projects. Again, that decision is really cost driven for us. We get enough design and schematics done. So at schematic design, we send it out we blast it to
Yeah.
everyone, and we say like, look, we understand we might have to make some tweaks here and there to maximize spans. We found that mass timber suppliers are willing to take a little bit of that risk on and say, hey, if you made the corridors this much wider, you could reduce this much of our panels, or that sort of thing. So we do that at schematic, knowing that we're basically we're going to choose our supplier at the end of schematics based on cost, and we're going to take a little bit of risk that of course at schematics you don't have as much detail as you do at CDs or even DDs, and so there's going to be a little bit of cost risk there. But usually what we've found is there's enough of a difference between, like, there's a clear winner, or maybe like between two versus everybody else at that point. Because again, the different spans are just optimized for different size parcels, different uses, apartments, but classrooms are bigger. So maybe a different company is better suited for that right now. And so there's usually like one or two clear winners. And so we'll have some more conversations with those two. So we've used to answer your question, we've used three different ones. We used Mass Ply Panel from Freres on the first project. We used CLT from Sterling on the second project. And we used CLT from Mercer on this most recent project.
And do you see any sort of premium because of the size and scale of these projects as opposed to something
Much bigger,
much
probably.
bigger or closer to suppliers?
I don't know, just because
You
we
just get
wouldn't
the price you
know
get.
what their big, like, I'm sure there's definite, well, I don't know. I don't want to speak for the suppliers. I'm not sure. That's a really good question. I would guess there's, some economies of scale, to it for sure. Um, there's like some other ways that we save, like there's an architectural grade and there's an industrial grade. So architectural grade, all the knots are going to be filled in and sanded down. There's going to be just a lot less imperfections. We actually kind of like that look, and it's cheaper to go the industrial grade to leave those knots exposed, like open. So that's another way that we kind of save. I mean, you're not saving like six figures, but you're saving five on that, 10 to 20 grand probably between the two. Um, but I don't know if I'm sure there's probably a premium because we're not buying as much, that's for sure. We calculate the carbon footprint of, we have to calculate the distance that the material is traveling. So like Freres is out in Oregon. Sterling is we got it from their plant that's in Phoenix, Illinois. So it was a lot shorter there. And so we kind of take a little bit of that into effect, or into consideration, but really we have to do it based on cost. But Mercer they got half the job of the Walmart campus down in Arkansas.
Oh
And so
yeah.
I'm sure that there are hundreds of thousands of square feet of panels were
Yeah.
probably a little cheaper than ours. And plus just the publicity that comes from
Yeah.
that. But happy to share anything more, whatever's helpful to you guys. Again, um, we are in the business of helping more people do mass timber. We're trying to prove you can do it at small scale. And if you got a project that's this scale or bigger scale and you ever want to bounce ideas, we're here. We're here to help. Although I would defer you first to Ashley and her team, because they will have the absolute expert opinions. But if you want to talk to someone who's done the blood, sweat, tears three times to figure out how to and like taking learnings from one to the next. We want to help you leapfrog over those learnings, and just hit the ground running. So always happy to help.
And that's super helpful. I'd say the biggest hurdle I've seen here in Ohio is getting that first developer to take the leap. And
Yeah.
so connecting developer to developer, I think will be a really awesome tool.
Happy
So,
to we talk to developers across the country for exactly that reason. And oftentimes they're doing much bigger projects than
yeah,
what we're working on, but we can tell them our, our small viewpoint on it and how we got it to work, and hopefully they can scale it to even more savings on their bigger
yeah,
projects.
very much appreciated. Thank you
Yeah,
for your time for the presentation and all the awesome information.
of course. Great.
Sure.
I'm really excited about what you guys are doing there in Ohio with the CLF, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Yes, for sure.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.